In our last video, we talked about this idea of fossil fuels versus renewable energy sources, two different places that we can get our energy. And we saw that all sorts of different things can have high amounts of energy. So there's chemicals like coal, oil, and gas that have energy. The sun has energy, the wind has energy. And actually, scientists, in order to make things simpler, they've taken all these different things that can have energy, and they've grouped them into a few different categories. So we're going to use this video here to go over these different categories so that you can learn the names of different important forms of energy. And so now this is not going to be a list of all the forms of energy, but we're going to list some of the most important ones, so you can learn these names and it will be useful for talking about energy as we go forward. So for each one, we'll have explanation. Everyone makes spelling mistakes sometimes. So we'll have the forms of energy, the explanation, and then some examples. Okay, the first one we already saw is we'll talk about chemical energy. We saw how certain chemicals like fossil fuels can have lots of energy, and so this is a very easy explanation. It's just the energy that chemicals have. That's all it means. Chemical energy, the energy that chemicals have. So some examples would be like fossil fuels. So that's coal, oil, gas, gasoline. But also batteries have chemicals inside that have energy. And then this might sound weird, but actually food, the things that we eat, those are just essentially chemicals. Everything is made of chemicals: oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. Our bodies are made of those things, and food is made of those different chemicals also. And so food is just like the specific chemicals that our body can use as an energy source, as a fuel. Okay, so that's chemical energy. Next, thermal energy. And you've probably seen, we already saw this word thermal, and you might even recognize the meaning. Therm is also in thermometer, it was also in geothermal, and it's the energy that heat has, or the energy that hot objects have. So some obvious examples would be like fire or the sun. Clearly has a lot of thermal energy. That's a very hot object. Even just like hot coffee or hot water has thermal energy. An important thing to know though is that even a cold object has thermal energy too. It just has less thermal energy. It doesn't have none. So let's just think about why this is. If you have a cup of cold water, okay, clearly that's colder than hot coffee, so it should have less thermal energy, but it can't have zero because there's still something colder than a cup of cold water, like an ice cube. So the cold water is actually sort of like hot in comparison to the ice cube. So it has to have less thermal energy than the hot coffee, but more thermal energy than the ice cube. And even an ice cube doesn't have zero thermal energy because there's something colder than an ice cube. You could have like dry ice. And so long as there's always something colder, that object still has some thermal energy, it just has less. So hot coffee has thermal energy, fire has even more thermal energy, the sun has even more thermal energy, and even cold water has thermal energy, it just has a lot less. Okay, next. Kinetic energy. This is one that we're going to talk about a lot. We'll have like a whole unit on it later. For now, what you need to know is that it's the energy of motion or speed. So some things, anything that's moving has kinetic energy. So some obvious examples would be like a car moving on the road. But there's also ways that we can use this kinetic energy as an energy source, like as a fuel. So for example, a flowing river, we could put a water wheel in the river And because the water is moving fast, that's a sign that it has kinetic energy. And we could use that energy as a fuel. So we could use the flowing river as a fuel there. There's a lot more to say about kinetic energy, but we'll save that for our unit on it later. The next one is gravitational potential energy. And again, we'll have a unit on this later, which is good because that's a complicated term. But you might recognize in here the word gravity. Gravity is part of gravitational potential energy. And that's because this is the energy of objects that are high up. So anything that, like, if gravity wants to make it fall, if there's something that's high up and gravity wants to make it fall, then that would be something that has gravitational potential energy. So again, there's examples where we can use this gravitational potential energy as an energy source. So this would be like in a waterfall, or in a like a water dam. These are cases where you have water that's held high up, and when the water falls down, then we're using up that gravitational potential energy. Or that's a bad way to say it, but we're using that gravitational potential energy as a fuel source. And then you could also just have gravitational potential energy like if you are in a high place. So this is a silly example, but maybe you've seen like in the circus or in a TV show or cartoon, there's a person standing on this end of like a seesaw, and somebody else were to jump from up here, from this high platform onto there, they could get this person going pretty fast there. And that's because starting high up here, you have some gravitational potential energy when you're starting high up like this. If the person started down here, this would not work because they don't have energy to get this thing going. So again, when you're higher up, you have more gravitational potential energy. And finally, the last one that we will talk about in this set of videos is elastic potential energy. And you might think of like an elastic rubber band, and you'd be exactly right. This is the energy of something bent or twisted or stretched, bent, stretched, or twisted out of shape. So if you take a rubber band and you stretch it back, or if you were to take like a wooden yardstick or ruler and you flex that and bend it, it wants to like spring back to its original shape, and so we say that it has elastic potential energy while it's bent. So this would be like a slingshot that's pulled back, or a bow and arrow. Anything that's bent out of shape has elastic potential energy. So these are the 5 kinds of energy that we'll be working with here. And these are really just categories that scientists made in order to keep track of all the different things that we talked about before. And so in the examples that follow this, you'll have a chance to answer some questions and explain which different forms of energy each different situation has. So good luck with that, and next we'll see you for another discussion of energy.